Many years ago, I was working as an HR director for a large company, and we did a pretty substantial layoff, about 300 employees, which at the time was about 10%. An employee who was working in the HR department had just been notified, and she came to my office, she sat down, and she said, I'm pregnant. I don't remember exactly what I said at the time. If I said anything at all, I know it wasn't helpful. I felt like it might have been a threat, like she might sue the company. So I think I went into corporate mode. I was also pretty young at the time. I was early in my career. I didn't know what to say, but I certainly wasn't helpful. I was a real jerk about it. It's kind of an embarrassing story, but I think it's a good example of what we're talking about today, and that's care and connection in the workplace. So, Christy, why don't we start by defining care?
Yes. So, first off, we care out of necessity. It's just part of who we are and how we do things. And really, to be human is to care, if you will. There's no switch. We can't turn it on or off. It's, at the end of the day, about listening and helping out others and making sure that they feel supported. There's also to note, leaders and thinkers in the fields of psychology, sociology, philosophy, even communication, do studies on care. And there are deep philosophical roots, yes. But what's important is there's a lot of practical applications and implications to this as well. And for example, my focus is on philosophy and communication. My own interest is in hospitality of care and the research that I've conducted related to that, as well as kind of care and responsiveness. But the philosophical approaches, they really consider why and how. Like there's a shared meaning there. And I know that this is kind of different from yours, Amy. And, that's okay. That's actually really good. Today, more than ever, I think it's important to learn from others who have different standpoints, even when we don't agree.
Yeah, we argue about this stuff all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
And I think I tend to focus more on emotion than you do too.
Yeah, and I think, yes, and, care is foundational. At the end of the day, it's just about showing up for people. It's not fixing anything. It's not changing their experience. There's no reciprocity.
Yeah, let's talk more about that and what reciprocity means.
Sure. When you say there's no reciprocity, there's no mutual benefit. When we think about this in the workplace, we can't expect the same return or the same gesture from someone after we give them or demonstrate care. Care, again, it's unconditional. It goes back to to be human is to care. There's also no transaction. Care isn't transactional. And in the workplace, when we show care and a commitment, it's because it matters to us.
Yeah. So let's drill down a little and maybe give an example.
Yeah, sure. We have these leaders. We all have leaders who take the time to check in on their employees. And when this is done out of a genuine care for the other, there's no willingness or thinking that they're going to gain any favor or they're going to gain support from the other person. It's genuinely taking the care and concern to show that they're looking out for their employees and they want to make sure about the health and well-being for this. We also at the same time, though, have to make sure that we know that it can't be demanded on everything. So care can't be demanded. It's really just, recognizing there is a responsibility to the other. Care in this way, we can really think about it's everyone's business, right? It's similar to humility. We don't necessarily like to talk about humility. And, most organizational structures don't even think about humanity when they're putting their policies and procedures into place. Go back to the opening example that you were talking about with HR and the individual who was expecting a child. In that moment, you followed the organizational policies and procedures, and didn't take the time to demonstrate that care for the other.
Yeah, that's right. I get it. In retrospect, I was what I think of as self-conscious or kind of hyper-aware of myself and not concerned about her. I think I could have said something like, I'm so sorry. I know this is such a happy time for your family and yet such a terrible time to receive this news. I think I also could have said, I'm sorry, not as an admission of guilt, because I don't think we were guilty, but just as a demonstration of compassion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways we can apologize. It doesn't always have to be out of repentance.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I might have added at the time is this decision had nothing to do with your pregnancy, because it didn't, and that would have, like, appropriately, I think, defended the company or protected the company. But I see, like, not saying anything probably made her angrier, definitely angry at me and at the organization. But one thing about this idea of care also is that we don't know what the outcome is going to be, right? But that's not really my job. I'm not, as you say, trying to fix or change anything. I'm just doing my part, and how it turns out is kind of how it turns out.
Yeah, and 100%. And this goes beyond just kind of organizational cultures too, right?
Yeah. And this is where we also get into organizational hierarchy and power dynamics. I mean, that definitely affects how we give care. So I want to talk about another example, and this is about Sheryl Sandberg. People probably know she was the CEO of Facebook, now Meta. And she was married to a man named David, who was the CEO of SurveyMonkey, and he died suddenly. And she talks about the pain of returning to work. So I want to read a quote from her. It's not just the loss or the cancer or losing a job or someone in your family going to jail. It's the silence that surrounds that. And so when I lost Dave, I had this overwhelming grief, but also just this isolation that I had never felt in my life. I had always felt really connected to my friends, my neighbors, my family, people I work with. But when I came back to work, barely anyone spoke to me. And I know they meant well. They were afraid of saying the wrong thing, so they said nothing at all. And I relate. I mean, I think that speaks to why a lot of us don't say anything, because we feel like we don't have the skill. I also want to talk now, though, about connection, because Sandberg mentions this idea of feeling isolated. And like care, one thing we do agree on is that connection is a communication practice. It's about how we interact with others, how we build relationships over time. And there's this great need in today's organizations and, of course, in the world to feel more connected. We're reading more about people feeling increasingly lonely and isolated at work, and it doesn't matter if they work at home or in the office, they feel isolated. And now people are turning to AI. Yeah. Work friend, companion, romantic interest, right? We feel disconnected, stressed, and burnt out.
With the disconnection, work, stress, burnout, maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about what actually brings you to this work?
Sure. Well, I had that HR background, and then I was teaching management communication at Cornell, as you do, and it's great work. Yeah. I felt that there was something deeper, though, that I was missing, and it turned out to be about character for me, that who we are as people has a lot to do with how we communicate with others. So I wrote a book, Building Leadership Character, and I had already had a textbook at the time, Business Communication, so I revised that to focus on character as well. And then I'll say at some point during that process, I went into recovery. So a 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous, people probably know about. And sure enough, these programs are all about character, and I did not know that going in. So that was great, especially about humility that I want to talk about later, as well as connection. Mm-hmm. So it's someone with maybe an addiction to gambling or shopping or food or our phones or drugs or alcohol, helping other people. And there's an expression in 12-step programs, connection is the opposite of addiction. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked many times about how we separate our public and private lives, right?
Yeah. Well, I definitely did that when I was in corporate, and I think that separated myself from other people and left me feeling disconnected.
Yeah.
I remember you said once you worked with someone for like 3 years, they didn't know you were married. So now I want to talk a little bit more about humility. And the way I've written about it is it's about being open to learning. That's part of humility. And that means asking for help when we need it. Humility is also about right-sizing ourselves so we're not above people, but we're not below people either. It's making space for others, which certainly fits into our conversation about care and connection. And I think there's something here about our sense of shared humanity. Like we're all in this together. We're all just people. We're all feeling stressed at times, and we all need help sometimes. But my concern is that stress in the workplace leads to more addiction. That when we have a bad day, and it's a joke, right? I'm going to have a glass of wine. I can't wait for that glass of wine at home. Or I'm going to stay home and binge Netflix all weekend. And that's totally fine unless it becomes an addiction, as it did for me. So instead, we're suggesting care and communication for people in the workplace. And I think what we're talking about makes a difficult workplace more tolerable also.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like care, connection cannot be demanded, right? We can choose to connect. We can choose to make it more easily for us to be with other individuals. And when we think about it in the workplace, a really easy example is to think about starting a new job. And when we start a new job, there's always going to be this baseline level of care, whether it's care for the organization and maybe more perhaps for your team. Mm-hmm. And it's not, though, until we start working with the team members and we have those experiences about working with them that we start developing a level of care, or maybe it does stay neutral too. And with that, though, we can choose not to care, and we can choose not to connect in that moment. This doesn't imply isolation. I think that's really important. It also doesn't imply a refusal to kind of help others. It's okay to take some time for yourself. It's okay for that self-care and reflection, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, now tell us the steps we can follow.
Yeah, there are no steps.
Yeah, bummer.
No steps for caring. When we care, we start to build connections. But there are no steps. And it's important that this is going to be unique for every individual. It's going to be different for every relationship that you have. And that care level is going to change too. Sometimes we move together and, sometimes we move apart. But what's important is just to remember that human connection is always going to be there.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of the stability, if you will, in the situation. It's also important that we respond. And that we don't react. And this is why learning or building care, building connections, it takes time and patience. And that also includes asking people for help too. It's not just giving that care.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about that because we're all stressed at times and feeling burnt out, and yet we hesitate to ask for help. That's really hard for people. And I think it's paradoxical, but I actually think that asking for help is a service because then we open up the possibility for others to ask for help when they need.
Right. Yeah, it's not in my nature to ask for help.
Yeah.
You know this. But also, most of the time, like when we're asking for help too, it's to be clear, we're not asking for help for somebody else to do our job. And it is also about knowing when to ask for help. I know my personal limits. And I know when I need to seek help, and I can ask for that. Also, sometimes, we help others even when no one tells us to. Yeah. And so that's where that kind of goes back to asking and giving and receiving.
Well, I asked for your help to
You did, of course.
to do this eCornell talk with me, and you said, I'll do it. And I said, are you doing it because you want to or because I'm asking you for help? And you said there is no difference. And that
Yeah.
taught me a lot about how you think about this stuff.
For sure. Yeah, no, we have a responsibility to others, and that's kind of my grounding. And it's not because we have to, but it's because it's the right thing to do. I think that's a matter of, knowing caring's not about liking people. You don't have to like a person to demonstrate care, and it's not about being nice. And Calvin Traub and I wrote an article a little while ago, and we entitled it "Niceness, Flattery, and Deceit." And in it, we're calling people to commit to being good, not nice. And it's about committing to being good, not nice, in the way we see this in the workplace all the time. Take, firing someone, right? If an employee is not doing their job or they're harmful for the organization, firing is legitimate. There's not really a question there. But in that moment of choosing to fire that person, it's being good, not nice, because they have been harmful or they're not doing their job. And at the end of the day, being good is not being mean. In that moment, good for the organization could also really be good for that individual as well.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you brought this up because I think this is a real issue with poor performers, that people feel like it's mean to, address the performance. But I actually think the opposite. I think when you care for someone, you expect the best from them and want the best for them. So we set high expectations for people and then we support them to get there. Okay, I want to talk back about this issue of reciprocity. I completely agree with you that we don't offer care expecting anything in return. However, I do want to talk about some research because we get actually a lot of benefit from care. And your background is comm and rhetoric. Most of this research is from psychology and organizational behavior. As one example, Adam Grant wrote about givers and takers, right? That people who are more likely to give actually have better career success in the end than people who are takers. There's good research about generosity and how it makes us feel more satisfied at work. There's a ton of research about gratitude and what that does for our well-being. And all of this falls into what psychologists might call pro-social behavior, things that benefit others, like giving and sharing and caring. So I also want to say about service in 12-step recovery programs. Service is the 12th step, and it's very important for people in recovery. Often, if people are having a tough time in recovery, they'll be advised to go find someone else to help, someone who's newer in recovery. And what that does for us is get us out of our own heads and focusing on other people. And there's good research to support service too, that it reduces stress and burnout.
Yeah, our focus here is, care as a framework or an umbrella. And I think that's kind of a good opportunity to start bringing in, talk about some workplace examples too.
Good. Yeah, I also want to talk more about compassion, and I know I define this a little differently than you do. I think of it as a dimension of character, and in the compassion literature, we think of it as alleviating suffering. And there aren't steps to follow for compassion either, but it might look like noticing when someone is in distress or suffering in some way, and then feeling a care for them, and then taking some sort of action. So I'll give an example of, let's say I'm in a meeting with someone and they're presenting an idea. They're really excited about the idea, but it's just not going well. They're getting a lot of pushback on this idea. And I see in the meeting that this person's getting upset. So maybe I don't do anything right then, but after I would approach this person and just say something like, "We were really tough on you. How are you doing?" And that doesn't mean that I think it was a good idea.
Right.
Maybe I thought it was a terrible idea and this person did not prepare well. But I give them an opportunity to talk and then I just listen. And maybe they come to it themselves and maybe I help out a little too to say, yeah, I needed more data or I didn't consider the constraints properly or whatever it is. But the point is that I lead with compassion first, not blaming and shaming people.
Yeah, maybe we can go into another example with this too. And, in addition to working from kind of a philosophy of communication approach myself, I'm also working from kind of a religious grounding and kind of, when I look at care, it's about upholding my responsibility and commitment to the other through action, I should add.
Yeah, you told me about a time that you talked with a colleague about your own faith practice and how it helped you navigate situations at work, but also with family and friends. And I think it sounded from what you said that it really resonated with them because you share this religious tradition. And I love that example because I wouldn't do that, right? So that was really unique to you and that person and that situation.
Yeah, and I tend to do what I feel right in the moment. And I also did what I felt right in the moment, knowing that person as I do. Again, care it's really about just checking in. Looking to make sure that person is supportive, that they're doing well, or checking in on the feelings itself. Doesn't have to be a stressful time either. It could be any time, any moment, but to demonstrate that you're there to help. And it is simply asking the question, how can I help? In other situations, we find ourselves in the workplace and, we might find ourselves in a meeting and we notice that a colleague is rather quiet and it's not like them to be that in the meeting. And so, after the meeting, taking the time just to check in, what happened? How can I help? Is there something that you would like to talk about? And at the same time, sometimes it's okay just to sit with someone. It might feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel uncomfortable, maybe not even after the first time you do it. But sitting there and just being present can really make a difference for another.
Yeah. And I think it's about finding balance too, because we talk about empathy, which is, of course, important, but there's some research also that we can go a little too far with empathy. And what I mean by that is feeling agony ourselves. So we get sort of hijacked or taken over by someone else's emotions, and then we're in a puddle and not helpful at all. I think sometimes the other thing that happens is that we get so stuck in the emotional state that we have a tough time really moving on from it. And let's face it, it is a workplace and we have to get on with the work.
This is also something we've agreed on.
Yes.
It is a focus on the work. And we do share this sense of accountability and integrity. And, if we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it. We'll figure it out, right? Here too, though, it's important, there is a balance. It goes back to that. And, when you think about what balancing, not only from work, but from other people. And so this can leave us feeling angry and resentful. It also leaves us at work, but leaves others to do the work that we're not doing or we're choosing not to do. And don't get me wrong, I've completely been there. I've engaged in that sentiment more than once, but some detachment is really good. And it's a really good way to manage our stress and move into kind of focusing on what matters work or choosing to focus on what matters.
Yeah, and to figure out what matters, it's useful to think about what we can and cannot change in the workplace. I'm all for trying to change things for the better and doing that with courage, but we can't change everything. And I hate to say it, but a lot of organizations are sort of inherently unfair, right? They favor some people more than others in ways that don't always make sense. So what do I do with that? What do I do with those things that I cannot change. Well, I can just stew in resentment about that, right? Or I could totally detach, as
Right.
you say, or I could figure out a way to live with it, accept it. And once I accept it, I can relax. I'm not causing my own angst, and then I can be available to other people, which is really what we're talking about here.
Right.
I remember once you said a student asked you, do you ever compartmentalize like personal and work life? And you said, every day.
You know, I would go venture to say probably every minute, sometimes every second, for
Yeah.
sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is what we do as responsible employees, though. And you know, I don't want to minimize issues that people have in their lives and crisis situations, especially that just make work completely impossible. But oftentimes we have to just plow on.
Yeah. With the notion of plow on, I think that's a good opportunity to say, brings up the notion of resilience, right, too.
Yeah.
You know, employers often want employees to kind of bounce back after setbacks or stressful situations. And when that happens, employees resent it. They feel as maybe the workplace is uncaring in a way. We also feel like we need to protect ourselves from harm.
Yeah.
And, you know, yes, of course, maybe some of us could be tougher, thicker skin, or have a backbone. But we also can think about how we can things like giving and receiving constructive feedback in the workplace, and how do we respond rather than react in those manners. But resilience is really about resisting, right? This means that it's an opportunity to broaden, maybe, instead of having this emotional reaction so that we become hardened. And if we choose to, in that moment, choose to focus on developing our capacity, instead of hardening, perhaps we're softening. And we're also developing a larger capacity in that way. I can roll with a lot more when I do that. It's not pushing against or fighting, and really developing how our agility and our flexibility in that sense too.
Yeah, in mindfulness and meditation circles, I hear this described as spaciousness, increasing our capacity for self-awareness and also greater compassion for others.
Yeah, and you know, resilience is about the self, for sure.
Yeah.
But let's be clear. We're not talking about a narcissistic self here. It's not an egotistical self. It's an egocentric self. And it's about developing that care, that self-care in the most charitable way. Self-protection or defensiveness, when we look at this, we're trying to increase our capacity, yes. But if you know, let's take another maybe example within the workplace there. When we develop resilience, or we choose resilience, I guess, with organizational change, I've been in situations where I've been resilient, and where I had decided that I was going to go with the flow and, you know, take the additional work, whatever that looked like, and that's fine from an organizational perspective, right? But when I allow myself to change, I'm also allowing kind of this openness to others and an openness for possibility, even welcoming the change. And that's where we begin to kind of further develop that capacity, right? It's also not about resisting something that exists. Again, it's an openness to the possibilities of that. And maybe in a way, looking at being tough, right?
Yeah.
And
it's really about hope in a way too,
hope,
isn't it?
Right?
Yeah.
So let's think about this. Let's summarize or wrap this up. We'll give some steps where, you know, there's no steps, but there are basic principles to caring, right? No steps. No defined outcomes, but this might be uncomfortable for us. And when we look at this, you know, we might get it wrong when we demonstrate care for someone, right? And that's okay. We're not going to have all the knowledge. We're never going to have the knowledge. We need to rely on our intuition. and offer up some compassion in the moment. It's not about fixing anything. All of us could be pushed out of our comfort zones, and we will be. But it's about it being the right thing to do. And the right thing to do in that way is kind of, just being present, being there. Care and connection in the workplace especially, this is a skill that to be practiced. It takes time. It takes patience. So what I think we would encourage people just to spend some time every day, think about people, checking in on people, what they might need, and then reach out. Because at the end of the day, it could make a big difference to another person.
It could also make a big difference for us and our own well-being too.
That's true.
Well, thanks so much for the conversation, Christy. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Of course.
And thank you all for joining us today for this keynote.